people will go into the fear of learning and maintain that facade over the actual um, deepening into learning. Is it really because it ties down to identity? Like, what's the fear underneath if someone finds out, for lack of better words, that you don't know something?
We don't feel capable, we don't feel competent, we don't feel as though we're able to really do things. And we're all trying not to be found out. Like, we don't want other people knowing how little we actually do know.
Hey everybody, it's Bianca.
Welcome back, Evolvers. It's Emilia.
Emilia and I are trying to do all new, all fun things here at Evolve. And one of the things that we are going to be launching um, really soon is our Evolve therapy division, our Evolve therapy program. Obviously, we already have it up and running, like we're both already seeing clients, but we are going to be expanding on it a lot more. And a couple of weeks ago, I had taken some time off of my other job so that we could dive into it and so that we can do some of like the back end stuff, the fun LOL, but not so sexy.
Grueling.
Yeah. The down and dirty behind the scenes work of what it takes to do some of that stuff. And um Emilia, being who she is behind the scenes, it's like, all right, B, we're gonna do this and we're gonna do this and we're gonna do this and here's all of these things. And I'm just like over here in the corner, overwhelmed as hell, like, oh my god, what is going on? And one of the one of the things that Emilia said is, B, do you know how to do a pivot table? And I'm like, "Do I know how to do a what?" And she's like, "Okay, perfect." So we go into Google Spreadsheets, and obviously we live in Google Spreadsheets. It's fun stuff. But we're in Google Spreadsheets and she's walking me through how to do a pivot table, and we're doing all of these different types of analyses and all of this stuff. And my heart is beating out of my chest the entire time we're doing this. My entire energy just drops, and I'm so overwhelmed and I'm so triggered. And the internal narrative that is going through my mind is, oh my God, I'm so dumb. Like, I can't figure this out. Why is she having me do this? Why can't she just do it? Like, how is this relevant to anything? Just going straight into like victimizing myself and then getting frustrated with Emilia because it's like, why do we need to do this? So we're going through this process and I have a like little mini breakthrough and I'm like, oh my God, like, I'm feeling really triggered. And she's like,
Yeah.
yeah, B, I can tell, like, what's going on? And I'm like, this is bringing up a lot of shame. I'm feeling really insignificant. I'm feeling really defective. I'm feeling really dumb. And you were so kind and you were walking me through this and like, what's coming up? What is this bringing up for you? And what it brought up was a memory of when I was a young girl in school trying to do something. I don't even remember what it was. I think it was like a book report or something. And I couldn't grasp the information in the book. And my brother had to help me, which thankfully he was a lot smarter than me when we were kids. So he came, he helped me, he was doing all this stuff with me. But what it brought up was this really old core wound that I'm not intelligent, that I'm not a good student, and that I'm not capable of doing things, and that I always need the help of other people in order to do things, which really brought up that worthless, defective core belief. I, for a really, really long time, was afraid to learn. I didn't want to learn difficult things, like especially math, which was basically what Amelia and I were doing. Like, it was more like stats, like making a pivot table, doing all of like the analysis of all of that stuff. But it brought up this really deep core wound and all of these memories of me for a really long time being afraid to challenge myself and being afraid to learn, because anytime I was trying to learn something new, all it did was bring up these old memories and these old feelings of I'm not smart,
Mm.
I'm unintelligent, I'm not capable. I wanted us to do an episode on this because I know that I am definitely not alone in this, and I am definitely not the only person who has ever avoided something new because they were afraid of the limiting beliefs that come up for them as a result. So, I'm excited to see where this dialogue goes a little bit, but for anyone who's just to get us started, for anyone who's listening to this, you are definitely not alone, and learning new things can be scary, especially if you have evidence from your past that led you to a negative core belief that you're somehow defective and not good enough.
Yeah. And I'm really grateful we're talking about this, B, because obviously, in order to evolve, we need to work through this big fear
Mm,
of, and maybe it's not a conscious fear, right? Maybe it's an unconscious fear that then gets triggered with something super small like this, right? And it was super small to me, but it was really big for you. And the starting point was when you were really young. And so a lot of people go through life and unconsciously they're actively avoiding all of these opportunities to learn new skills, new social dynamics, new tactical competencies, new things, and are get so focused on trying to protect the image of them looking good, looking smart, looking whatever, protecting their perception, right, in the eyes of other people. And they get really, really good at that game instead of the game of learning. And the game of learning is something that is the most, from my perspective, the most important game that ever will exist in this lifetime because of what, not just learning for the sake of learning, but learning for the sake of who you can become as a result of applying that knowledge which you learn. And so Bianca, now sitting here in front of us, right, like has more knowledge that she can go and apply for her own benefit. Now, is she going to be the master spreadsheet wizard that I am? Absolutely not. I can have
do
her
I
try.
want to? No.
Does she want to? Absolutely no, right? Like when people hear spreadsheets or when they look at spreadsheets, most people cringe. Most people have a visceral response that go and send them right into fight or flight, right? And so it's really the conversation around why are we afraid to learn? What is it that catalyzes that, right? And what do we need to do, or what belief system do we need to evolve in efforts for us to actually gain the value of learning and the skill of learning and the gamifying learning and having a growth mindset. And that's really what this dialogue, from my perspective, I hope to bring our listeners, because I know for a fact, and science finally is there, it is in our face if we look for it, that shows that people who actually have a growth mindset and who
Mm,
overcome their fears of learning new skill sets, right? One of the things that I'm overcoming actively is yeah, people might be like, what? This doesn't make any sense. But speaking more effectively, I'm trying to overcome what I realized was a mindset around when I speak, it's a bad thing. Right. And so all of us have these little core beliefs or limiting beliefs about a specific area. And they stem from memories that were created so far back. And then they just get perpetually agitated.
mhm,
And there's more evidence that builds underneath those. So those people who aren't afraid to learn, those people who do have growth mindset, also known as open-minded individuals, they have so much more resources available to them. And studies show directly that that translates to, when applied, higher income, more social status, more access to resources,
mhm,
better friendships, a better quality of life, better health, better mental health, physical, spiritual, emotional health in general, it also translates to so many other, I would say, spin-offs from those betterments in life. So if you are listening to this episode and you feel like there's an area of your life that's kind of stuck, I would pose the question back to you, or B, same thing like I had posed the question to you. What's going on there? Why are these emotions coming up? Why is there fear when it comes to learning? And in
Mm,
this situation just so happened to be pivot tables, right? And B, I do want to commend your courage in this moment because I think it's important for the listeners to hear. Bianca had, when I asked her, B, do you know how to do a pivot table? Which, for anyone that doesn't know what a pivot table is or needs and wants, I think it's important just to share because that's where we start, right? Share definition. It's one of the most powerful tools that exists on computers to calculate, summarize, and analyze data so that you can extrapolate trends, patterns, and comparisons, something that our brain naturally does, but it doesn't do anywhere close to what a pivot table can do. And so imagine you're sitting there, right? Let's use a basic example. Groceries, right? Groceries, people have been talking about how groceries have been super expensive nowadays. Let's say all of a sudden you find yourself with a drier bank account than norm. You start to try to say like, why is that the case? And you start to extract all of the data from your credit card to look at your grocery bill. And you have all the data on a spreadsheet of what the last 6 months of transactions has been like. If you were to try to manually calculate what are the trends and what things should you not buy anymore because those are draining your bank account faster, maybe it's blueberries have gone up like crazy and you didn't notice it because it was something super small, imperceptibly small. A spreadsheet, putting that data in there and having a pivot table literally does that in freaking seconds. And so, what is the value of that? It gets time back. So, I could go on a diatribe. Bianca's laughing because I'm already nerding out. But why I mentioned that, and how I'm going to bring this right back to courage, is I asked Bianca, do you know what a pivot table is? And she had a real visceral moment to go along with what she has been taught her entire life to do, which is cultivate and maintain her perception over learn a skill set that's going to help her again and again and again. And so I commend Bianca's courage in that moment, B, because you had the opportunity to be like, yeah, and bullshit your way through it. And I would have eventually found out, right? But like, we're so fearful, and I can't necessarily speak to this, but you shared vulnerably with me. We're so fearful to be found out because what does that mean about us? And so you now
100%.
have, and that wouldn't have been there without your courage. So I guess I kind of want to volley this back to you. Like, what was that like for you? Because the listeners for sure know what that's like, and they may
Mm,
not know consciously what that's like, but that's something that you and I have been able to overcome so many challenges as a result of that humility and courage that you've demonstrated
mm.
and for vulnerability in those moments where I'll ask if you know something or can you do something, and you literally have this moment and you have to say, no, I have no idea. I think you're projecting on me. Like, call me out on my delusion, So I would love to hear that for you.
Kinda tying back into what you were talking about the growth mindset versus fixed mindset. It's really hard to have a growth mindset when your sense of worth comes around your ability to do things and the perception of your ability to do things more so than anything. Nobody wants to be nobody within themselves wants to feel like they can't do things, and we don't want anyone else knowing that we're not capable of doing things because more of us than we want to admit don't feel good enough. We don't feel capable. We don't feel competent. We don't feel as though we're able to really do things. And we're all trying not to be found out. Like, we don't want other people knowing how little we actually do know. And that's really scary. It's
Mhm.
really scary when the majority of us are afraid and don't feel good enough. And then the idea of going to another person and actually validating that It's like, "I'm
Mhm.
not doing that. Are you out of your mind? I'm not gonna let anybody know that I can't do things. I'm gonna not get into any situation where
Mhm.
that's even a question." Which is what most people do. Most people just surround, and I did this too. Like, I'm not saying this as like a holier than thou. I used to do this too. I'm not gonna go put myself around people who are so much better than me to where I have to start questioning myself.
Mm.
Because when I was growing up, I sucked at basically everything and I needed help with literally everything. And my family did the best that they could, but instead of teaching me, they just did it for me.
Mm.
So I never learned. I was defective and I was not capable, not because I actually wasn't capable, but because nobody ever taught me. And so
Right.
I learned to
Yes.
just not show it
Mhm.
or to just get help from other people so it didn't look as though I wasn't capable. So I think the only reason why I'm actually really willing now to just be like, honestly, I have no idea, is because my goals are so big that I have to be honest about what I can do and what I can't do so
Mhm.
that I can actually learn those things to get the things that I want. So like for example, if somebody has a goal of, losing 20 pounds and you go to a fitness trainer and they're like, "Hey, do you know how to do this?" And you say yes when you really don't, you don't get the goal. You don't get to
Yeah.
lose the 20 pounds. But if you're like, honestly, I have no idea. I'm really new at this, but I'm open to learning. You have a much greater chance of learning the skills and then being able to get the goal. So I've had enough instances of pretending that I was just like, honestly, I really don't want to be called out right now. Like, I don't want you knowing that I don't know how to do this because I already feel inferior. But it doesn't help anybody if I am not honest, and it's not gonna help me because I'm gonna feel terrible about myself. So
Mhm.
I made the decision to be honest, and I said, "No, I don't know how to do this," and honestly, I feel really insecure about that, even though I had no reason to know how to do this because there's been nothing in my life up to this point
Right.
that would have made me need to learn how to do a fricking pivot table, but
Mhm.
I was like, "No, I don't. Can you show me?"
Yeah.
And again, I really believe the reason is because I want the result more than I want you to think highly of me. But I also know that you'll think more highly of me if I'm honest and if I'm willing to learn. And I think this
Right.
is another really big thing for anybody listening to this. If you're surrounded by people who think less of you for putting an effort, or for not knowing, or for acknowledging that you don't know, you're not going to be open about it. And honestly, you probably
Mhm.
shouldn't.
Yeah.
Like, realistically, you
Such a
probably
fair point.
shouldn't because if you're around people with a fixed mindset, they're going to pick fun.
Mhm.
Like, the thing that you're afraid of probably will happen. They probably will say something. They probably will poke fun or make a joke or think less of you. This is why it's so important to be mindful of the people that you're spending your time with because if the people around you are invested in their own growth and are invested in learning to a higher degree than you are, then it's safe not to know.
Right.
It's safe to ask questions. It's safe to learn, but not when you're surrounded by people who will think lesser of you because you don't pretend to know as much as they're pretending to know.
So valid, B. I'm so freaking glad you said that, B. Literally, because when you think about it, the pretending is a byproduct of that, the lack of
Yeah.
psychological safety to actually take messy action. And that's one thing that we talk so deeply with our clients is like if you're not willing to take messy action, that's more of a byproduct of the people that have been around you than it is of you.
Yeah.
Because when you're a little kid, right, and it all starts back when we're little, we're curious. Naturally, we're curious, right? That's a big element of in IFS the self, right? Our true self is naturally creative, curious, courageous, clear, right? They're calm, so many C's, but the biggest C that represents true self is curiosity. And if you don't feel psychologically as though you can be in a state or maintain a flow of curiosity that is such a reflection of the people that are around you and how little they actively seek out curiosity in their own lives. Woof. What a mirror there. I didn't think that'd come up with this, but it's like so huge
It's
around
a
this
huge
discussion.
it's a massive part of it. I mean, you and I last week were talking about, attunement, and I'm
Yeah.
really starting to dive into some of the more neuroscience aspects of psychology, which is really cool,
Mm,
and one of the big components of what makes a secure person is the emotional and cognitive attunement of them and the people that they're around. Attunement is connection. So if Emilia is in a really negative emotional state and I'm really susceptible to other people's negative emotional states, I'm more likely to match her. That's a super high level version of it. I know I probably didn't explain that the best I could have, but our brains will literally match the energy and the emotions and the thought processes of the people around us. And so if I'm surrounded by people who are fearful, if I'm surrounded by people who are status driven, who are more afraid of not belonging in their group than actually being who they are,
mhm.
and I want to belong to that group, I'm more likely to imitate their behaviors and I'm more likely to try to attune to them, and my brain will naturally do it anyways. So
Right.
none of these things started changing in me until I started spending more time with more people like Emilia and other growth minded humans who just want to get better. I had to rise to the level of the group that I was around,
Mhm.
and that actually made it safe to learn. I wasn't being shamed for not knowing. I was being celebrated for my humility and vulnerability and the courage to say, you know what, I don't know, but can you teach me? Or can you give me some resources to look up and I'll go learn it on my own and we can come back together and kind of pitch and catch and see where we are from here?
Yeah. There's one itch that I really feel compelled to scratch for this episode, and I'm gonna trust my intuition on that. And it
Ooh.
pertains to a question that I have for you, B, because just for the listeners, I think it's important context. Like I have always been hyper growth mindset. Like ever since I was a kid, I've been naturally that way. So I want to put that out there because I don't want to pretend as if I know really what that feels like to not feel fully enough to the extent to which you had. And I know that there's a part of me that's super insecure about that because I'm fearful even admitting that, but I do believe that the truth will set all of us free in that aspect. So maybe one of our listeners is on the hyper growth end and also has this itch. And I also think that if you're not on the hyper growth end and you haven't had a life of that, I think your answer will be really validating for those people who are starting to dip their toe into their evolved journey and really recognizing like, oh my goodness, because of this episode, I'm really starting to understand I have more people surrounding me that are maybe more fixed mindset. The question to you be is around the reason why we people will go into the fear of learning and maintain that facade over the actual um, deepening into learning. Is it really because it ties down to identity? Like, what's the fear underneath if someone finds out, for lack of better words, that you don't know something? What is the narrative that, speaking from your experience and what you've heard with clients? Obviously, I've heard that from clients as well, but I'm super curious. Like, what have you experienced? Is it validating that you're just not enough? Or is there another narrative that ends up happening if someone were to find out that you aren't capable? And is there some catastrophizing, cognitive distortions that come into play? Like, help us walk through on that. And then what I would love, I know this is loaded. What I would love is one little takeaway for our listeners as we kind of come into the rounding of this episode. If they're struggling with this not enough core belief and they find themselves surrounded with people with fixed mindset.
I mean, it's all of the above. It's going to validate your negative core belief that you might have not fully acknowledged to yourself, that I don't feel good enough. I'm
Mhm.
not smart, I'm not capable of doing things, they're gonna find me out, they're gonna reject me, um, I'm gonna feel terrible about myself for the rest of my life, no one's gonna love me because of this, like, I'm inferior, this person is better than me, they're always gonna be better than me, like, I think it's highly dependent
Mm,
upon the person, this is a highly subjective experience, but
right.
the the gist of it is, number 1, this validates the negative things that I already think of myself.
Okay.
Number 2, this then puts me in the physiological state and the emotional state of how bad it felt in the past when
Mhm.
this came up, and then a future projection of what's going to happen as a result.
Gotcha. And so does that tie down to the feeling of aloneness, like feeling of being left behind by these people that maybe do have the skills or are growth oriented?
I think that's really dependent on the person.
Yeah.
It might be.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard that a lot. And so I just am curious if that's been what you've been observing of clients as well who experience this, because there's a lot of shame that people experience around learning and not knowing, you know?
I I can only talk from my experience, so that's what I'm gonna do. So when I had to admit to you, or no, let me rephrase that. When I chose to acknowledge the fact that I don't know how to do this,
Thank you for the reframe.
I was really afraid of what you would think of me. That you
Mhm.
were gonna think less of me, that this might validate, that I don't belong here on this mission with you,
Mhm.
that you in some way were going to have a realization that you made a mistake choosing me to be your partner.
Mhm.
Um, like all of my really deep seated fears and my projections of what you were going to do about that is really what came out. And then all of the negative feelings and beliefs that I had from my childhood,
Yeah.
really not feeling good enough and always having been compared to my brother, who had to always step in to help me because I wasn't
Mhm.
capable, and because now in reflection, I know they didn't have the tools to teach me how to do it.
Mhm. Mhm.
'Cause I wasn't an unintelligent kid, I was actually I was really smart, like, I always did well in school, but, like,
Mhm.
it wasn't I wasn't a self-starter.
Mhm.
I didn't become a self-starter until, I got into fitness,
Mhm.
and I got really, really good at fitness, and then when I met all of you guys, then it really started being, like, in the intellectual, the social, and the, um, business aspect of all of
Mhm.
these things, like having ambition in all of these different arenas. And then a part of that was like having a growth mindset, being willing to fail, doing
Yeah.
all of these things. But it was pure fear. I was scared shitless that you were going to think less of me, and then
Mhm.
that somehow like it was going to be some horrible disaster for my life.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. The way in which I responded was the complete opposite to that.
Mm,
Okay. And then the last question for you is what would you share with someone who
yeah.
is on the bus of really in a situation where someone you get put on the spot, you get asked to do something, right? Like friend, family, colleague, whatever, right? Like and you don't know how to do it and you have that micro moment to make a decision. Pretend like you do and suffer the consequences of whatever happens there or be honest with yourself and with that person and admit to the fact that you don't know or you know this but you don't know all of it like what would you suggest to that person who has that core belief, the cognitive distortions coming up, all of those what ifs coming down the thought train? And I know it's subjective.
I mean, it is, but it isn't. It's just what I'm gonna say is a little bit more of a nuanced skill, but practice this in circumstances where you're not in the moment so that when you are in the moment, you already have this tool.
Mhm.
Cognitive restructuring and Socratic questioning. Socratic questioning is basically asking yourself a series of different questions to get to a different answer. And so what I would suggest and what I suggest to clients and literally what I did with myself is in that moment ask, what is the outcome that I'm looking for in this situation? Do I want to be perceived as being good, or do I actually want to be good at whatever this thing is?
Mhm.
What is making me afraid of being honest? Am I afraid of this person's opinion? If yes, why? What is so bad that's going to happen if they know that I can't do this? If they are going to judge you, are these really the type of people that you want to be surrounding yourself with? So I would ask yourself a series of questions like that. And honestly, if you're being honest with yourself, ultimately you will be able to, I mean, maybe, I don't know, but you'll get to a point eventually where you just want to be better more than you want to look better. And so you'll let yourself get to the point where you're honest and you're
Mhm.
like, honestly, I do just want to actually get better at this. But so start asking yourself those types of questions and let the real answers come up.
Love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice.
Great questions.
I dig
Um,
it.
what's your episode suggestion?
My episode suggestion, thanks for you letting me know that I didn't have these prepped, but now here we are with 341. Are you wearing your trauma like a badge of honor? You?
Mhm. Before I give mine, if this is something that you guys are struggling with, again, you are definitely not alone. And n- overcoming the fear of learning is something you can learn. It's a skill. Just like anything else, everything that we teach on this show, everything that we talk about, it's all skill based. You can learn anything. And I know that's really scary for a lot of people who have trauma and hurts around learning, but I hope this helps all of you to see that it is something that can be overcome. Like you can learn a growth mindset, you can learn all of these things, and it's not a scary experience. If you're surrounded by the right people, it'll be such an opening, beautiful experience. So I hope you will all take that journey for yourself. And please reach out to us if you would like help with that. We have the You Do You program, we have one on one therapy and coaching. There's so many services here that we can help in. My episode suggestion is 333, Why You Don't Trust Yourself to Make Decisions. We hope this was helpful. We hope this sparks your desire to learn. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.